Hello, everyone. I'm Derek Weeks. I'm Vice President and DevOps Advocate from Sonatype. To start off with today's presentation, we are going to go back to Detroit, 1982. Things are moving fast. In this year, 4 million vehicles will roll off the production lines in Detroit in the year. Every day, line workers like this are responsible for seeing 15,000 vehicles move down the production line. Their focus is on velocity. If the wrong brake assembly or bumper is available to them for the car moving in front of them on the production line, they are to put it on the car and fix it after release. This behavior eroded the U.S. automakers' share of the domestic market by 20% in the years leading up to 1982. They lost this share to the Japanese because the Japanese understood that automating their environment was critical and that automating that focused on high quality made all the differences. It made them more efficient. It made them more scalable. It made them more consistent. And every single manufacturing industry on the planet has adopted automation, including software development, to enable these things to happen. We also recognize that for our organizations developing software, just as they did in Japan, that speed is king. Get more product to market faster. And ever since 2009, when they stood up at Velocity and talked about, when John Osbaugh stood up and talked about 10 deploys a day, the software industry has been chasing this dream within their DevOps and CI/CD pipelines. If you've read DORA's State of DevOps report this year, you'll see that 7% of organizations have achieved that goal. Being able to deploy multiple times a day or on demand. 48% of organizations can actually deploy within the hour or at least a couple of times a day. But for the elite organizations, they have the ability to actually change or introduce changes within their environments and deploy those in less than an hour. At the heart of this velocity also lies open source. It's not just the Jenkins open source applications that you're using or Sonatype Nexus that you might be using as applications in your environment. It's also the open source components, binaries, and libraries that accelerate the development that you're doing. One particular proxy of that development that's been automated are the number of download requests that we see from the Maven Central Repository each year. In the last decade, we've grown from 1 billion download requests from 10 million Java developers on the planet to this past year, 87 billion download requests. A lot of that is through the use of automated tooling that you have in your DevOps pipelines. If you're a JavaScript developer, you're also using NPM packages. Last month, the NPM repository recorded 6 billion downloads in a week. There are only 6 million JavaScript developers on the planet. Things are moving fast. But what we also understand is it's not just about velocity. Quality and security have to play a role within these environments. You can't just get products to market fast without worrying about quality. But some, like Bruce Schneier, who I stole this quote from, would say that there are no consequences for having bad security today. Or are there? There was one organization last year that made headline news that we all know about that was using a vulnerable open source component in their production environments. And I think you all know the story of what happened after that. But I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about what happened in the couple of days at the very beginning of that journey and that timeline. There were 3 important days that happened back in March 2017. On March 7th, the Apache Struts project announced there was a vulnerability in their web application framework. They released a new, safer version of that. The very next day, the NSA noticed that at the Pentagon servers were being scanned by nation states to identify vulnerable versions of struts in those environments. On March 9th, 2 days later, Cisco recognizes a lot of activity of exploits happening or vulnerabilities being exploited in the wild. 3 days later, on March 10th, Equifax is breached. But it's not just Equifax. The Canada Revenue Office is breached. Canadian Statistics is also breached. In Japan, the GMO Payment Gateway is also breached. 3 days later, the Japanese Post, Okinawa Power, also breached. 1 month later, India Post breached. All Struts-related breaches. By December of that year, hackers or adversaries were adding crypto miners to vulnerable versions of Struts to make themselves millions of dollars. By March of 2018, the Indian Social Security system was also breached due to vulnerable versions of Struts in their production environments. Today, over 8,700 organizations worldwide still download vulnerable versions of Struts, including 57% of the Fortune 100 organizations. If you think this is a problem, it's getting worse. In the last decade, the time between a vulnerability being disclosed and a vulnerability being exploited has compressed 400%. Your average time to exploit is now 3 days and even less. Our challenge in the DevOps community and CI/CD community is to automate faster than evil. When we look at our environments, it's not only what are you using, but if you're using something that's bad, how fast can you fix it? The elite organizations can fix it in under an hour. If it takes you longer than 3 days to implement a change, you are at risk from adversaries out there in the market. If you're one of the organizations that is developing using Java open source components, your organization downloads an average of 170,000 Java components a year. If you're a JavaScript developer, you are downloading 26,000 NPM packages a year. When we look at the rates of vulnerabilities, in this study that I did of 7,500 organizations, 11% of those components, or 1 in 9 that were downloaded, had a known vulnerability in them. If you've all read The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim and others, the first way of DevOps covered in that says emphasize the performance of the entire system and never pass a known defect downstream. Just because you're downloading it doesn't mean that you're using it. But when I surveyed over 2,000 people like you earlier this year and asked them, have you had or do you suspect an open source related breach in your environment? The breaches went up 55% year over year. They're up 121% since Heartbleed was announced 4 years ago. But like everything else, automation can help us. If you're automating open source policies within your environment, your developers are more likely to follow them. In fact, twice as likely to follow the automated open source policies that you have in your environment. If you have policies, but they're not automated, you only have about 30% compliance rates within your organization. Also, if you're managing your software supply chain through automated open source governance capabilities, we've analyzed over 60,000 applications in managed and unmanaged software supply chains, and the difference is dramatic. You will cut the number of known vulnerable open source components used in your development practices by almost 50% if you manage and care to manage those in your development practices. There is benefit to actually looking at what you're building. It is automated, it works fast, but You don't have to do it. You may be made to do it because government understands that you're not coding from scratch anymore. You're downloading parts to use in products that you're building. Some of those parts have known defects or security vulnerabilities from the start. It's illegal in every other industry in the world, manufacturing, to put known defective parts into products and sell them to someone. You can't put a Takata airbag in a vehicle and ship that to a consumer today. Why should software be any different? Government is already starting to regulate with GDPR, and more policies and regulation are coming across the US and Europe with liability associated with it. If you don't choose to move yourself, government may choose to help you move that direction for you. That's all of my 10 minutes. If you'd like a copy of the slides, the easiest way to get them is my out-of-office message is on today. If you just email that, you don't have to say, hi, thanks for your slides, whatever. The out-of-office message should come back. It will have a link to the slides on SlideShare. You don't have to register for those. Thank you very much for attending. I will be at the Sonatype booth downstairs today and tomorrow. If any of you have questions or if we have time here, I'm happy to take those. And if anyone just emailed me, if you could confirm that it actually worked. Otherwise, I have to go through and answer all of you individually, which would be a lot of fun. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.